Right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. All right, as people are starting to gather, let me first say greetings. I'm Sharon Hidalgo, the chair of NAWIC's National DE&I Committee and vice president at Siegel. On behalf of NAWIC and our DE&I committee, I'd like to welcome you all to our Juneteenth webinar. We are so excited to co-host this webinar in partnership with Gilbane's Building Company's Employee Resource Group, UGMA. You know, the owners and leaders at Gilbane have known for some time that people are their greatest asset, which is why they have created a safe space and opportunities for employees with similar backgrounds and interests to come together to showcase their leadership, problem solving, innovation, and developmental skills. UGMA is one of 7 employee resource groups at Gilbane, and their goals are to be a resource and serve as allies to African-American employees. Thank you, Gilbane and UGMA, for your partnership with NAWIC and joining us for today's events. I'd also like to give a shout out to all my NAWIC sisters, our allies, and my colleagues at Siegel. Before introducing our special guests, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules. You'll be placed on mute during our conversation. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature or chat, and we're going to respond to as many questions as time allows. And now let me introduce our special guest. Ms. Alexis Herman began her remarkable career with Catholic Charities, helping young, out-of-school men and women to find work in a Mississippi shipyard. In addition to pioneering apprenticeship opportunities for these youth, she also led efforts to place the first women of color into professional and technical positions in major corporations, including General Motors, Delta Airlines, and Coca-Cola. These efforts led to the appointment at a very tender age of 29 by President Jimmy Carter to be the youngest director of the Women's Bureau in the history of the Labor Department. As secretary, she focused on a prepared workforce, a secure workforce, and quality workplaces. She led the effort to institute a global child labor standard, move people from welfare to work with dignity, and launched the most aggressive unemployed youth initiative since 1970s. Under her tenure, unemployment in this country reached a 30-year low and witnessed the safest workplace record in the history of the Department of Labor. Ms. Herman has served both Democratic and Republican U.S. presidents. She is the recipient of numerous awards and honors and is also an inductee in the Minority Business Hall of Fame and the National Women's History Project. Currently, she serves as chair and CEO of New Ventures LLC, a risk management firm. She has continued to lend her expertise and talent to a vast array of corporate enterprises and nonprofit organizations. More of her significant accomplishments can be found in her biography. Please join me in a warm emoji welcome, U.S. Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman. Welcome to our conversation. And our other special guest is Michael Brown, a regional president at Gilbane Building Company. He oversees all business operations and sales strategies in Gilbane's Midwest and Texas divisions. Michael provides leadership and operational oversight to nearly 700 employees and annual revenues of $1.5 billion, that's with a B, y'all, billion dollars. With nearly 30 years of experience in the industry, Michael is a recognized leader in construction. He has successfully partnered with Fortune 500 companies and some of the nation's top universities, hospitals, and cultural institutions to create places and spaces which enhance our communities. In addition to his leadership in the industry, Michael has been an active community member, serving in both industry and civic roles, including past board memberships on the Florida Chamber of Commerce. In fact, he was recently recognized as one of Florida's 500 most influential business leaders, and by Savoy Magazine as one of the Power 300 most influential Black executives in the U.S. Michael also serves as the executive sponsor and ally for UGMA. More of Michael's notable accomplishments can be found in his biography. Michael, welcome to the conversation. And now I'll ask Jerry Harris, our DEI Committee Chair Emeritus and Director of Economic Inclusion at Gilbane, to get our conversation started. Jerry?
Thank you so much, Sharon, and welcome to our honored guests and all of our attendees. I am thrilled to moderate this conversation with both Secretary Alexis Herman and Michael Brown, and you as we get to the end of the session. We all know that in 2021, Juneteenth became a national holiday. So I would like to open our conversation by asking both Secretary Herman and Michael Brown to please reflect on the significance of this holiday in the context of the ongoing struggle for racial justice and equity, and share some of your thoughts. And let's begin with Secretary Herman, please.
Thank you so much, Jerry. It's always good to be with you. And my thanks to you, Sharon, for your kind words of introduction. And I'm delighted to join this team. And Michael, I'm delighted to share the stage with you. So when you ask the question, what does Juneteenth mean for me? I could spend the rest of this program, obviously, answering that question, Jerry. But I think for me, there are three things that I would say are relevant. The first is how much of our own history was just never told, and how much we just still don't know about many aspects of what has happened with the legacy of slavery and the history of African Americans in this country. And it is still a difficult conversation to have, even in 2024. You know, I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. I grew up there where the last slave ship docked in Mobile Bay. It was called the Clotilda. I never knew about the holiday, Juneteenth. I think I was in high school. I knew about the Clotilda, where 119 slaves, the last slaves that were brought to this country, got off of that ship. We were in the midst of beginning the Civil War, and it was now illegal for them to be sold. So they were just dropped literally on the shore. No resources, a strange country, they didn't know anyone. And so they settled there in what is now known as Africatown, a small community right outside of Mobile to this day. And so when I think about the history of the Clotilda, which I grew up knowing about, but many Americans, many African Americans still don't know that story, let alone the story of Juneteenth. It just reminds me of how much more we still have to push for the inclusion and the conversation for all of us in this very diverse country, because I think it helps to create a better understanding for all Americans. The second thing for me, of course, is Grandma Opal Lee. Many of you may not know who she is, but she is called the grandmother of Juneteenth. She inspires me personally. Her legacy inspires me personally. She's 97 years of age today. But at the age of 89, she led a march from her hometown in Texas to Washington, D.C. to petition for this holiday, to petition Congress. How many of us can talk about any passion that we are still committed to at 59 or 69, let alone 89? And she had been doing this for decades. Talk about persistency and courage and never giving up. She inspires me to this day. And then the third thing that I'd say very briefly is that this is a holiday that helps to create awareness, and I think it helps still to force creative conversations so that we can continue to be better listeners and to be better understanding of who we are as a nation and the diverse cultures and people who make up this great country.
Thank you, Secretary Herman. And Grandma, what was Grandma's last name?
Lee, Opal Lee.
Opal Lee.
Opal Lee. Yeah, she's known as the grandma of Juneteenth. And I mean, for decades. For decades. She went from state to state.
Yes,
She was a
ma'am.
school teacher by training, by the way.
Thank you for that. And Michael Brown, please.
Well, you know, I tell you, when we did a rehearsal, one thing I learned early is you should not follow Secretary Herman because that's a tough thing to do. But I'll do my best. And Secretary Herman, I hate to admit this, but I didn't learn about Juneteenth until I was probably in my 40s. So the fact that and it speaks to this idea of, you know, we don't know our history. And I'd imagine a number of folks don't know this history. And so honestly, I had to look it up. I did a little research so that I could try to speak with some level of knowledge about the subject. To be honest, in my house, we always celebrated July 4th, never Juneteenth, right? It just wasn't something we did. And as I reflected on it, I thought to myself, the 4th of July was all about the colonists really fighting for fairness and the right for self-determination. But the reality is, when you think about that in the context of Juneteenth, you realize for the enslaved, that didn't even begin until almost 90 years later, after 1776. This idea of self-determination. And I'll be honest, to some extent, I think that battle for fairness is still ongoing. So when I think about Juneteenth in the context of our history and how it relates to today, I think that some of that same struggle for fairness, for equity, is still ongoing. And that's why we're still having this conversation today. So I appreciated your insights very much, but that's what it means to me, Jerry.
Michael, you're not alone. There's so many of us in our 40s and 50s even that didn't know about Juneteenth. It just speaks to the point you're making.
And I think that there are still many, and it is up to us to continue to have these conversations and make sure that all of the generations to come have an understanding. Just because it's a national holiday does not mean that they will know the history. And many will not even celebrate the day. So many organizations now have closed their offices in celebration and observation of the day. And we thank you both for what you've done in this journey, how you have dedicated your life to the struggle and to improving all that we can stand for. So thank you both for those reflections. So now I'd like to ask, if I may, Secretary Herman, you a few questions to share more of your experience with us. So let's talk about your personal journey and legacy a little bit, because I know you got a lot.
You know.
I know. So can you share with us some pivotal moments from your upbringing that shaped your commitment to advocacy, particularly in the realm of labor rights and equality?
Well, Jerry, when I think back to my early days, my first experience, I was 5 years old. I was riding in the car with my father. He had been attending a meeting, as he often did, and he would take me with him sometimes. But they were talking about, voting rights and what we had to do to help our people. This is in Alabama. As I said, I'm from Mobile. And it was in a rural community just outside of Mobile. And my dad was pulled off the road by the Ku Klux Klan that night. And he was pulled from the car and he was beaten by the Klan. And he pushed me. He drove a green and white DeSoto. I'll never forget that car. He pushed me onto the floor under the dashboard. And he said, "Alexa, stay there." And he put a gun in my hand. I've never touched a gun from that day to this. And he said, "If anyone opens that door, I want you to pull that trigger." Well, you can imagine a 5-year-old child on the floor, but my daddy had a sense, I guess, that night that the Klan was riding. And we were so blessed that the church where the meeting had been held, they had rumors as well that the Klan was out that night. So they followed my dad on the rural back roads to make sure he got on the highway to Mobile. Anyway, to make a long story short, when they arrived, the Klan broke up. My dad was lying there in the field. And all that I really remember from that moment was Father Warren, who was the priest at the time where the meeting had been, coming to the car saying, Alexis, 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 it's okay. It's Father Warren. I'm coming to get you. I'm coming to get you. Well, my dad survived, but I think I learned at a very early age, Jerry, he was willing to die for what he believed in. And for him, it really was about just getting the right to vote. You know, we couldn't back then, of course, vote. And so it was a very big issue in my community. So I learned the importance of standing up and fighting for what you believe in, which led to probably my second pivotal moment. Although I didn't interpret all of this at the age of 5, trust me. But it started to shape, I think, my own outlook. And when I was 15 years of age, I was expelled from high school because I dared confront the Archbishop of the Mobile Birmingham Diocese of why a Catholic school system that embraced the biblical teachings were segregated, and why were we always pushed to the back in every event. So I did something I would never advise young people to do today. But at this particular event that the Archbishop was attending, I found his dressing room and I hid in it. And I hid in it until the event was over. And he came back and I confronted him, and, you know, as a 15-year-old would sort of ask all the questions of why. Needless to say, without going into all that happened to me that night, I was expelled the next day from high school. But my expulsion led to the first time ever of the parents and the teachers coming together in my community at the only Black Catholic high school in the diocese to protest my expulsion. And it went on for a number of months, but at the end of the day, not only was I reinstated, but the Mobile Birmingham Catholic school system was desegregated. And that was before, of course, the Civil Rights Act itself passed in 1965. So it was a pivotal moment from that day to this that has taught me that you have to be willing to take risks for what it is you believe in. You have to be able to take a risk if you want to see meaningful change. And I always say when I'm speaking, especially to young people today, it's not necessarily about the risk you take, but it's about the habit of getting into risk taking. Because the more you do it, the more you find the butterflies leave you, the fear leaves you, the doubt leaves you, and you learn to keep stepping out of your own comfort zone. That is so very important. So those would be the two moments I'd share.
Thank you very much. Two very powerful moments. Thank you for those two. I would like to move to my next question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, impactful initiatives. Throughout your career, could you highlight one or two initiatives you've championed to advance minority and women's rights in the workplace?
Well, yes. One, Sharon talked about in my own introduction. I'm so proud of the fact that I was able to help lead an effort, believe it or not, back then with the support of a grant from the Ford Foundation and subsequently the Department of Labor's Research Department. I was in my 20s, to place the first women of color in any major professional job in the Deep South, in any major company. We were there as secretaries, and not very many of those, and housekeepers, you know, but no managers, no professionals. And so to this day, I can see Aurelia Stanley, who was that first woman accountant at Delta Airlines. I still see the faces of those pioneering women who were really the odds breakers back in the day for what we now see And by the way, I still think we've got a long journey to go in corporate America, and particularly as we talk about women in construction. Michael, I know you'll get into that a bit. But because of those breakthroughs, the doors have been open for women in so many ways. But ours is still a tale of two cities, where we've got, folk who've made it at the top. But the vast majority, when it comes to really earning incomes and having positions of authority and leadership, ours is still a story that is unfolding. And the second thing, the story I loved telling, and I don't have enough time to go into it in great detail in this seminar, but when I came to Washington, D.C., the young age of 29, to work for Jimmy Carter, the very first policy initiative I worked on was to amend Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to say that discrimination based on pregnancy was a form of sex discrimination. And I was shocked. I mean, shocked. Here I am, neophyte from Mobile, Alabama, that people didn't understand that somehow there was a correlation between pregnancy and sex, but there really was, because there was a case at the Supreme Court that they had actually ruled, and this was the GE Corporation at the time. The case was brought by the Electrical Workers Union, that challenged the fact that they would give a man 6 weeks off to have a hair transplant, but they wouldn't give a woman 6 weeks off to have a baby and be guaranteed that her job would be there when she got back. So there was no such thing as guaranteed job rights for women. This is, the late 1970s. We're not talking about way back in the day. You had no guarantee that you could come back to your job if you'd had a baby. So we actually had to amend Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to draw this correlation between pregnancy and sex discrimination. It was the very first leave policy in this country for women to have any job rights. Now today, you have family and medical leave, and you have other kinds of leave policies. But I gotta tell you, back then, this was the very first. And I'll never forget a member of Congress, and then I'll be quiet, who got on the floor protesting this legislation. And he said, we can't do this. We can't do this. If we pass this legislation, just think about it. All the women in America will want to run out and get mammograms. And I thought, well, this is a guy who's never had a mammogram before. I doubt that all the women in America, because of this legislation, would be running out to get it. But that was the thinking back then. And so I'm so glad that we opened the door with pregnancy leave for women and guaranteed job rights as the first leave policy in this country.
That is both insightful and amusing. Indeed. And I'm sure that you could speak on this topic as well, based on recent legislation and laws and actions in a whole separate direction, in a reverse direction. So I'm sure that you could speak on that, and maybe we'll come back in the chat too, in the open session time, to talk a little bit more about that. My last question for you, Secretary Herman, is in the area of challenges and resilience. So what challenges and controversies have you faced during your tenure as Secretary of Labor and Professional Career that have tested your resiliency? And if you would, the second part of that, just share a little bit of how you navigated those experiences.
Well, that's another whole session here. Michael, invite me to Gilbane's, okay? And we'll have a fireside chat about this one, all right? But I have to say that when I think about my tenure as Secretary of Labor, I was on the job for just 3 months when the UPS and Teamsters were involved in a strike that was the largest strike in this country in 20 years. I was, 3 months into the job. I was confirmed in May, and here it was August. And I kept being told, oh, they won't strike. This is a union and a company that knows one another. And so people didn't really believe it would happen. And I certainly didn't, but it did. And the bottom line is, I had no appreciation for how much the small package market really affected our economy, because everything came to a standstill. And for me, I'd never, of course, settled a strike before. I didn't think I'd start off being Secretary of Labor this way. I always say it's no way to start any new job, okay? But it gave me the mettle and the strength that I needed to be an effective Secretary of Labor, because everybody counted me out. The media, the unions, you talk about a doomsday environment for me. I was young, I was an African-American woman, I didn't come from the tough side of the labor movement, all of the traditional stereotypes that you think about, being female, being the first this in terms of pioneer, it was all on me. And I had no champions in the broader world, okay? But I did in my personal space. And so I had to do some very novel things to get them back to the table, which I was able to do. But once I got them back to the table, I was able to really have a table where we negotiated the agreement. It took us a week to get it done, but we did it. And so for me, that was a lesson of, you have to be very careful not to let others define you. You have to be very careful not to buy into the stereotypes. You have to be very, very sensitive to not letting anything shatter your own confidence when the leadership expectations of you are such that you have to light the path for others. And so it was a tough lesson for me on how to start off my tenure as labor secretary. But for me personally, Jerry, it made all the difference in the world. And I learned again the importance of stepping out of a comfort zone to help make that difference. We probably don't have time. You asked for one or two, I could go on forever here. I guess the only other one I would talk about, I was able to get the first ever global child labor standard passed in this country. The United States had a history with the International Labor Organization and our international treaty organizations of never being able to sign on to any labor agreements. And I thought that we needed to have a global child labor standard through which every child in the world, not just the United States, could be protected. It took me 2 years to do it. I had my own version of shuttle diplomacy, of meeting with labor ministers in Asia, in Africa, in the Caribbean. And at the end of the day, I won their vote, I won their support. We were able to pass it. But the trick was, in this country, it had to go through Jesse Helms, who was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Now, probably many in this audience, they don't remember Jesse Helms, but he was the senator from South Carolina, a staunch segregationist. He did not support my nomination as labor secretary. He voted against me. But I was the one who had to go into Jesse Helms' office to convince him that this was the right thing to do. It took me months to get a meeting with him. And when I walked into his office, the first words that came out of his mouth were, well, you don't have horns on your head. So I don't know what he'd been told about me. I don't know who or what he thought I was. But it was clear to me, again, this whole stereotypical thinking of letting other people define you. And you have to find that common hook, that common human space sometimes to reach people. And I had done my homework on child labor in South Carolina. And I was able to make it real for Jesse Helms. And at the end of the day, it was the first time ever that the United States of America signed on to an international labor standard. So I learned an invaluable lesson there that I couldn't let Senator Helms' history, his biases, distract me. And I had to find common ground to have the conversation. That's so difficult today. And it pains me oftentimes to realize as a nation today that the ability to find that common ground is so much more challenging.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for sharing all of those reflections and for, again, being who you are. I appreciate and applaud your all of the challenges and blessings that have come through you and because of you, and especially your resilience and how you on many occasions have taken me by the arm and helped me stand taller in all that I've gone through in my journey to, again, say, define yourself, stand for what you stand for, and be proud and committed. So I appreciate you and I thank you. So now, Michael Brown, I know that you are chomping at the bit and probably want to respond to many of the things Secretary Herbert had to mention.
No. That is, I am not chopping on the bit because I can listen to these stories for another hour, easy. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but thank you all. It's almost 300 folks here, and we appreciate you being on. But Secretary Herman, it's funny, I listen to you tell some of these stories, and I think about the impact that it's had in our society and in business and just in so many ways. And I guess when I think about my own journey, what I would tell you is I'm relatively tall, but I stand on the shoulders of giants. If I am anything, if I've accomplished anything, it's primarily due to those who came before me that made it possible for me to do some of the things that I've done. And Secretary Herman, when you talk about the kind of laws that you got passed, I have to thank you because I wouldn't be here without you. But when I think about some of those pivotal points in let's say my professional journey, a couple of things come to mind. Early on in my career, a position came up, and first time I could have been, I actually did become a vice president. And the decision came down to me and one other individual that had worked for the company at the time. Now, that individual was very talented, really good guy, architecture background, MBA from an Ivy League school, and I'm an engineer from a Big Ten school. And but I think ultimately I got the position because of a principle that, unfortunately, I still teach my kids today, and hopefully I won't have to share with my grandkids. But I always told my kids, if you want to be treated fairly, you must be equally measurably better. That's just how it works. It's not fair, especially growing up as an African-American in this United States. It's not fair. So if you want to be treated just like anybody else, you must be better. And ultimately, at the end of the day, while both of us had great credentials, we had worked side by side. In that particular context, I produced twice the results that the other individual did. And I remember one time my boss, he became my boss, direct report, he came to me and said, we're thinking about the other guy for this position. What do you think about that? And I said, I think I completely understand and respect your decision. He said, you'd be okay with it? And I said, no, I didn't say that. I probably won't be here much longer if you make that decision. He said, why? And I said, well, my results have been twice as good. And if you make that decision, obviously it must not be a results-based decision. And ultimately I did get the role. So I was very pleased about that. But that was one of those pivotal points where I feel like so many times we don't stand up for ourselves and stay, what we truly believe and how we truly feel, and make sure it's fact-based, not opinion-based, because so often it's too opinion-based. And then the other thing that I thought I'd share, and it was just something that kind of was, I didn't even know it was happening at the time, but it was here in Chicago, a local architect, and I didn't play a lot of golf, but he was chair of the membership committee at the Waukegan Country Club, which is pretty far north from me. And he said, Michael, we need more members. Would you join? I was like, Joe, I don't even play a lot of golf. He said, come on, I'm chair of the membership committee. I need you to join. So I said, sure. I joined this golf club. And I remember the first time I was out there, I was on the first tee, and in the summers that course had caddies. They were usually students who were in school, but in the summers they caddy. And so I'm on the first tee, and I see all these young folks, a lot of whom look like me, and they were all standing around the tee box. They were like all gathered, and they were pointing. They were just pointing. And I was like, Joe, man, what's going on? Who are they pointing at? He said, you didn't know? I said, no, what? He said, they're pointing at you. I was like, well, why are they pointing at me? He said, oh, you didn't know? I was like, no, what? He said, oh, you're our first Black member. I was like, oh, am I? Go figure. And, it's one of these little things you think about in what we do in our daily lives. You don't understand the impact that you could be having just by doing your best at what you do. And so I just remember those two things early in my career as things that kind of stood out and maybe helped me understand that I could have a bigger impact.
Michael, listening to you, thank you for sharing. When you told that story about, you said, it's okay, but I may not be here much longer.
It was true.
It reminded me, my daddy used to always say when I was growing up, one's bravery is in proportion to one's options. And so as an African-American man, as a Black man, I don't know your story in the sense of what else would you have done, right? But that took courage. I mean, that took real courage to stand your ground and maybe not to know where that next job would be. But you had
This was 25 years ago. I had no idea what else I would have done. I just knew I didn't feel good about it.
That's what I was thinking. You were true to yourself. And how important is that? Yeah, so that touched me. Thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And before I go to my next question for you, Michael, I just want to restate that one's bravery is in proportion to one's options.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we think about that, when our back is against the wall, sometimes we can find courage and bravery that we didn't know that we had.
Exactly.
So again, your father, thank you again for sharing those wisdoms from your father. So Michael, if I may, many of the comments that Secretary Herman made in regards to legislation and challenges for women in construction and women in general and families, I know that is one of the reasons why I chose to come to Gilbane, because they are trailblazers in dedication to diversity, economic, and inclusion. And if you would please just tell us about some of the commitments that Gilbane has as a company in the areas to help advance DE&I in construction.
Sure. It's interesting. I've been around here a long time, and one of the reasons I originally came, and not a lot of people may remember this gentleman, but years ago, we had a senior vice president, probably one of the top 10 leaders in the company by the name of Wendell Holmes. And Wendell, as an African-American man, led the Southwest division of the company. As a matter of fact, was just hugely successful. And I can't tell you how much it meant for me to kind of look up and see an example, And I think that that's so true for women. I think that's so true for minorities, to be able to look up and go, look, okay, it's possible. Because I can tell you, it's so many other different companies around. When you do look up, the highest ranking person you might see is a D&I person or in a role like that, but somebody who actually has profit and loss responsibility, hundreds of employees in their pyramid, to be able to look up and go, okay, it's possible. I can tell you from the minute I joined Gilbane and I looked up and saw Wendell, I knew that it was a place where that possibility was real. And so that meant a lot. And I would tell you that over the years, I found it to be nothing but that your possibilities are what you make them here. And they're not based on anything but. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And can you share with us, as a regional president,
Yeah.
and here with NAWIC, National Association of Women in Construction, some of your reflections in regards to the women that are also in your region and under your leadership?
I can. It's funny. I think maybe 2-3 months ago, there was a conference. A lot of the ladies in the office had gathered together. I'm sure it was a big event. And they said, Michael, will you come next door and talk to us, with the leadership team? And I said, sure. What do you guys want me to talk about? They said, well, we're gathered together. It's basically a group of our female employees here in Chicago. And I said, all right, what do you guys want? He said, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to talk about. So I went back in the room, and I happened to be in the room with, it was 12 folks who are the most senior leaders in the Midwest. So 12 total people, division leaders, business leaders, head of different departments, total of 12 people. And as I was sitting there thinking about what I was going to say, I kind of looked around the room and I realized, wow, 4 of those really talented leaders just happen to be women. So 33% of these, and moreover, I kind of looked again and I thought to myself, wow, I have 6 people with profit and loss responsibility in the Midwest, and 2 of them just happen to be women. Extremely talented, extremely competent, but they have that opportunity here. And I think it just speaks to, they're judged by the content of their work, content of their character, as opposed to anything else. And so I think these role models and folks in these kind of positions mean a lot. But I can tell you it's based on the quality of work and the quality of commitment they have. And they just happen to be a minority. They just happen to be a woman, and that's all anybody's looking for, I think.
Thank you for that. As we get ready to prepare to open up the conversation to those in attendance, I'd like for the NAWIC ladies to let us know, do we have any questions so far in the chat, Sharon or Lisa, that we would want to bring to either Secretary Herman or Mr. Brown?
Yes, we do. We have a raised hand by Parker Mullins. Parker, do you have a question? All right, then we'll move on to the Q&A. And this is from, no problem, Parker. This is from Ed Bennett. And the question is for Secretary Herman. What are some of the biggest hurdles being an African-American woman serving as the Secretary of Labor? Did you have a lot of support? And were there a lot of unnecessary hurdles? And we'll just ask you to respond to that live, if you could, Secretary.
I had a lot of support and I had a lot of hurdles. Let me just say that when you are nominated for a cabinet position, it's very important to come in with a broad range of support that endorses your nomination. And it usually starts with your home senators. So my biggest hurdle, believe it or not, being from the state of Alabama, my home senators had to be convinced. And one was Jeff Sessions, who went on to, of course, become President Trump's Attorney General. But Jeff Sessions did not initially support my nomination. But I can tell you, after many Hill visits, after many great conversations, after bonding over the commonality of our individual heritages from the state of Alabama, he supported me, but I didn't know until the day of my confirmation hearing that he was going to do that. And when he walked into the room after I was seated at the table for my hearing, the cameras and the lights were everywhere because that was a part of the big story. So You don't go in, with everything locked and loaded when you assume a cabinet position. And so I had a lot of work to do. I also did not initially have the support, believe it or not, of the ranking Democrat. It was Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy wanted me to take a different position because they wanted someone else to be the labor secretary. And I had to, again, within my own party, gather the support of Democratic senators, as well as reaching across the aisle to gain Republican support. I was blessed that I was able to have both sides of the aisle at the end of the day, but it was not an easy feat.
Thank you for that.
Was there a
do we
second part to Ed's question?
No, he just asked specifically about the hurdles that you had experienced. And I think you did address those. You did name some of the specific hurdles. And as you're getting, I'm going to ask the listening audience if you could please post your questions into the chat. We really would appreciate that. The other question that I have seen now is from Tad Scott. He is asking, what is something people can do to be a powerful advocate? Great question. And that would be for either one of you.
So Michael, I'll defer to you on this one, and I'll chime in.
Okay. I think being an advocate starts with just frankly trying to get to know somebody, right? If you truly want to advocate for somebody, it's important that you take the time to get to know them. Understand what it is their needs are, understand what it is their goals are, how are they looking to progress in their career or their industry or just do a great job with their family. I mean, the beginning of advocacy, I think, is understanding, right? And I think then advocacy comes down to, I like to think of it this way, and unfortunately, maybe sometimes I think my kids think I can be a little tough or harsh, but I always tell them, look, guys, I'm gonna tell you what I think you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And sometimes I think as an advocate, we think that that's just being supportive no matter what, and just encouraging no matter what. But sometimes people need to hear what people should hear what they need to hear, not just what they want to hear, right? And I think there's a difference, right? I was talking to my son last night. He probably wouldn't appreciate me telling this story, but I'm going to tell it. He actually has just accepted a new position. He was thinking about, and actually he's moving to Chicago. So those of you who know me know I'm a very happy man today because my son's moving to town. But all that being said, he said, I'm trying to be great at everything. I'm trying to do everything, and I feel like I'm not doing anything well. And I said, well, son, that's part of the challenge. You can't be great at everything. You can be competent at a great many things, but you can only be great at a few. And so you've got to pick what you want to be great at and accept being competent at other things, because nobody can be the best at everything. And that's a challenge sometimes people face. So I guess and I think about people who've advocated for me, they took the time to understand me. And a lot of times they told me what I needed to hear, not necessarily what I wanted to hear.
Great. And I would just add to what Michael has said in terms of first, you got to do your homework. That's so true. But it's also important. You can't just talk the talk. You have to be able to walk the walk. You have to be able to demonstrate by your own actions who you are. You have to have principles. When you walk in a room, people have to know who you are and what you stand for. And it can't be whatever the flavor of the month is or whatever's blowing in the wind that day. You've got to be able to be intentional and stay with whatever that intent is that is important to you. And so powerful advocates don't go with the news of the day or the story of the hour. There's a core and a belief system that they carry.
Right. And then our next is from Sonia Richardson. She has a comment, Secretary Herman. She says, recently I signed the change.org petition to promote honoring the legacy of Black inventors who changed history in America. It's beyond confounding how in 2024, the refusal to acknowledge and credit Black people is still something for which we are fighting. Thank you, Secretary Herman, for keeping up the good fight. Any comments to that?
No, I'm just so glad to hear her say what she's involved in and what she's doing. It goes back to how we open. There's so much we don't know about what we've done and who we are. And we need those stories because that's a part of our legacy. It's a part of our inspiration. It reminds us that, you know, you can do it. You too can do it. So thank you for that.
Sure. And this is from James Dunt. And please forgive me, James, if I mispronounced your last name. It's for you, Secretary Herman. What are the best places to visit in Mobile to learn more about Africatown and the Clotilda?
Well, first you have to go to Africatown. There's so much to see there, you know, and the history is there now as a part of the community. We also have what's been called our own historical walk. We talk about history, where we have pinpointed the lives and people with their stories along the way. For instance, you know, Hank Aaron is a Mobilian. He was from Mobile, Alabama. He was my neighbor. You know, we know Hank as a big baseball player, but there's a great legacy of baseball heroes that come from Mobile. So a part of what you want to do is just get in touch with the history. I don't know if you've ever heard, for instance, of Satchel Paige, who was the first really big African-American baseball player. Well, my daddy discovered Satchel Paige in a field one day throwing oyster shells at a light post, okay? Saw that pitch. So when you talk about Africatown, when you go there, you get so much of the history of Mobile, so much of the history of those last slaves who docked there and their stories. And there is a theory that when I think about Michael and Gil Baines and all that you're doing, there is a theory that when you look historically at where the first hub of African-American businesses flourished, it was in that Gulf Coast area, because they had to find their own entrepreneurial way of supporting themselves in this new country, in this new land, and using skills that they brought from Africa. So they were great cobblers and even the cooks and the things that they did in terms of setting up some of the first businesses for Black folk really started in that hub. And many believe it's a part of the legacy of those first slaves struggling in Africa. So, and you got to see the azaleas. I mean, it's, you know, my favorite flower. It's you got to do the azalea trade. Okay.
That
And
sounds
eat some shrimp.
Secretary Herman,
You got to eat some shrimp. You got to eat some shrimp and crab. Okay.
You know, it's interesting you talk about advocacy. And what you all may not know is James, who just asked that question. So James runs Pittsburgh, which is part of the Midwest. So he's a business leader. And I don't know exactly his heritage, but I'm going to guess of European descent, probably Western European descent, maybe some Scandinavian, but he's very fair skinned, let's put it that way. But James and his wife are going to take, I think it's 4 kids. James, sorry if I got the number wrong. I thought it was 4. Down to Mobile, Alabama, to learn about folks that don't look a lot like them.
Wow. Well,
so
you have.
What does advocacy look like? And it was funny. I know this because James texted me earlier. He said, "It's great. She's talking about that. I'm taking my family there next month." So before all this, James has made a point to teach his family about history of folks that maybe don't necessarily look like him. So if you want to know what advocacy looks like, James, that's what it looks like.
And Gil, you'll have to let me know so that I can give James a contact when he goes to Mobile and takes his family.
That would be wonderful. There's nothing better than when you get the sense of a place from a local.
Yeah.
And so I will take you up on that, and I'll connect you with James. So James, thank you so much. That means a great deal.
Thank you. Secretary Herman, I am certain these next two questions are on the minds of many of our listeners. How can you build your confidence as a woman in a male-dominated industry? That is the first question. And then how do you shake the imposter syndrome as a young woman who's new to corporate America? So the first question is, how do you build your confidence as a woman in a male-dominated industry?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say about building your own confidence, you have to look back on what I think of what were my past impossibilities. What did I think it was I couldn't do? And then you look back and you realize you overcame this, you overcame that. So oftentimes you have to reflect back on just what you thought you couldn't do. And then, you step away from it and you realize, I did that. I always say we have to find ways to fill ourselves with courage oftentimes so that we don't become discouraged when we're facing adversity. Secondly, I'm a big believer in surrounding yourself with positive people, with people who will lift you up, with people who will encourage you. There's so much negativity in the world today. People always want to bring the bad news, the bad stories, and so I'm a big blocker on all of that. And I've had to do that over the years, Young folks say, tell it to the hand. Well, that's how I kind of feel about it. Don't bring me back, don't bring me back. So you really have to create a network of support that's going to embrace your vision, your values. What is it you're trying to do? And draw strength from there. The third thing that I would say in terms of building your confidence, Michael talked about it a little bit, but those role models, find some role models. Find some role models that you can talk to, that you can learn from, that can help you understand you're not weird, you're not strange. You can do it, and listen to their stories and how they do it, and draw strength from that, so that I think oftentimes we've lost the art of sharing and being vulnerable to others in that way, to be able to receive that advice and help. But it is so important. I was blessed to have had Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who was, of course, the founder of the National Council of Negro Women and the first African-American woman to be a part of the so-called Big Six male organization. And I learned so much from her, and I was so blessed to have her as a mentor in my life, for more than 40 years until the time of her death, which kind of leads me to that second question of the imposter syndrome. I call it wearing the mask, right? Thinking you got to be all things and so strong. And then inside you're hurting and the pain is there. And the goal is to fit in so that you can be, quote, accepted, And it is difficult oftentimes for women, particularly women who are in pioneering roles, to bring their authentic self into the room. That is very, very difficult. So I think the first thing that you have to realize is that ours is still a journey. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if you're dismissed or ignored, but don't give up either. Michael talked about, you have to be better sometimes and push harder. Well, I think as a woman, we have to learn to sit at that table and know who we are and that we have something to offer, that we have something to offer. And I have found when you can have a teachable moment with someone, take advantage of it and do it. Don't do it necessarily in the room, in public, it's called, I used to always have to manage my rage. But you can have a quiet moment with someone and let them know how it impacted you, what they may have said, or that gesture. Because I have found so often in the male club, they really don't know. And sometimes we have to step up and be the truth teller about what was experienced to help educate them as well and to enroll them to becoming potentially advocates for you in the future.
Thank you. And we are at the top of the hour, just 1 minute over. So I want to thank everyone for posting the questions that you had in the chat and being very participatory during this event. I want to thank our special guest, Secretary Alexis Herman and Michael Brown. Thank you so much for participating. And a big shout out again to Ujima for helping to co-host this event, and to Jerry and Lisa for all that you do. Please look out for our next event that we will have. Have a wonderful Juneteenth, and please remember your history. And if you don't know it, you know now where to get the information. It's out there online, and each one teach one. I'll leave you with those closing comments. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Much